Hey, this is Supernova, an atheist reading How Do We Know the Bible is True, Volume 1, co-edited by Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge. And today we're on to Chapter 15, Evolution and the Challenge of Morality. It is written by Jason Leisel, who I've introduced before because he's written a couple of past chapters. He's got a PhD in astrophysics, so he's very smart. He understands logic, even though he makes logical fallacies. And he wrote the very first chapter on how do we know the Bible is true, as well as one on how to do foolproof apologetics. And in this chapter, he makes an awful lot of logical fallacies. Nearly every statement he makes is fallacious, and it's because he's taken on a topic that he can't defend. It's indefensible. Right from the title, you can probably guess where this is going. He's going to make a false dilemma, a false dichotomy between people who believe in evolution and people who believe in the Bible. And obviously it's not really two groups, because there are Christians who believe in evolution. They're not fundamentalist Christians like Jason Leisel and the other writers of this book, but they believe in both. If you were to ask them, where do you get your morality, they would say, from the Bible. Obviously, somebody who believes in evolution does not have to get their own standard of morality outside of the Bible. So it's kind of a dumb argument, and naturally he's going to make a lot of fallacies. Let's read. Morality is a very difficult problem for the evolutionary worldview. This isn't to say that evolutionists are somehow less moral than anyone else. Most of them adhere to a code of behavior. Like the biblical creationists, they do believe in the concepts of right and wrong. The problem is that evolutionists have no logical reason to believe in right and wrong within their own worldview. Not only is that not true, it wouldn't matter. He's attacking this foundation thing again, as if you don't have a foundation, so you can't possibly do anything on that foundation. Well, I just agreed that evolutionists believe in the concepts of right and wrong. It doesn't matter if they can do that logically. They can do that. I don't know why you can't accept that. Right and wrong are Christian concepts that go back to Genesis. As he goes on in the next section, the Genesis morality, the Bible teaches that God is the creator of all things. All things belong to God, and thus God has the right to make the rules. So an absolute moral code makes sense in a biblical creation worldview. If that's how it makes sense, then your morality is also based on a logical fallacy. Because I don't think that you actually hold to this standard as an objective standard. It makes sense if somebody makes an item, a possession, that they could do whatever they want with it. But when you're talking about living beings, do you really believe that, Jason Leisel? Do you think that you could beat your kids or kill them because you made them, thus you have the right to make the rules? Do you think that you could give them a rule that would put them in harm's way? I'm sure you don't. You don't actually believe that. You will only apply that standard to God. So it's special pleading. But if the Bible were not true, if human beings were merely the outworking of millions of years of mindless chemical processes, then why should we hold on to a universal code of behavior? I hear this from Christians all the time, like they don't remember what it was like before they were Christians. The reason that we hold on to a universal code of behavior is because we have a society, and you have to have rules in order to maintain a society. If you were to live on an island all by yourself, out in the middle of the Pacific, nobody around, you couldn't affect anybody with your actions, you would not have a government. You wouldn't have police, you wouldn't have laws, you wouldn't have rules. It would be anarchy, because why would you need any standards? Why would you need morality? You can do whatever you want, and you're not going to affect other people. And everybody else is okay with that, because why do they care what you're doing on your own? Now, of course, if the guy next door thought that it was okay in his own moral standard to kill and rob me, he would be jailed for that. Our legal system would take away that freedom from him. And if they thought that he was going to continue living by that moral standard, they would give him the equivalent of that island where he's away and can't practice his morality around the rest of us, known as prison. That's what we do, because otherwise we could not have a society. It's like Thomas Hobbes said in the book Leviathan. We have a social contract, and we have a Leviathan, the government, that steps in and protects us from people who have bad morals, people who have morals that won't allow them to live around other people. That's why we have morality, for rules on how to treat other people so that we can actually live as neighbors and trust each other and not worry. Evolutionary morality. Some might respond, well, I believe in right and wrong, and I also believe in evolution, so obviously they can go together, but this does not follow. Of course it does. Premise 1, I believe in right and wrong. Premise 2, I believe in evolution. Conclusion, therefore, believing in right and wrong and believing in evolution are not mutually exclusive. It's a simple syllogism. People can be irrational. They can profess to believe in things that are contrary to each other. Sure they can. I've made a video on how the Christian worldview and the Republican worldview do not line up, even though all the fundamentalists I know are Republicans, and they don't seem to see any contradiction between the two. And it always seems that they defend their Republican views above their Christian views. People can be irrational. Of course they can believe in things that are contrary to each other. The question is not about what people believe to be the case, but rather what actually is the case. Can concepts of right and wrong really be meaningfully apart from the biblical God? Put in other ways, morality justified an evolutionary worldview? Of course it can. I already explained why. In response to this, an evolutionist might say, of course, people can create their own moral standard, moral code apart from God. They can adopt their own standards of right and wrong. However, this kind of thinking is arbitrary and will lead to absurd consequences. If everyone can create his or her own morality, then no one could argue that what other people do is actually wrong, since other people can also invent their own personal moral code. He's equivocating the term own moral code. Maybe it would be clearer if we said, of course, mankind can create its own moral code apart from God, because that's what the critic is saying, that mankind does not need God for a moral code. He seems to read it as each person can create his or her own moral code. So he's attacking a straw man by equivocating. I'm telling you, he can't get through this topic without lots of logical fallacies. It's indefensible. Some evolutionists argue that there is an absolute standard. I don't, but some do. They say right is what brings the most happiness to the most people, but this is also arbitrary. Why should that be the selected standard as opposed to some other view? Well, because morality has to do with society, and happiness is one of the indicators of society. So is fairness and justice and utility. And sometimes these things conflict, which is why morality and ethics are difficult topics, and not everybody can agree on them. But nonetheless, I mean, these, if you value society and social obligations, then that is the standard by which to draw morality. Also notice that this view borrows from the Christian position. In the Christian worldview, we should indeed be concerned about the happiness of others since they are made in God's image. What a non sequitur. Why would we care about the happiness of others because they're made in God's image? Do you think that a person should not care about the happiness of their pet because their pet is not made in God's image? You think you can beat a cat and that's perfectly moral because they're not made in God's image? I don't think so. I don't think he believes in this, and I don't think he actually has any reasoning behind it. The happiness of others, though important, is not the primary concern within the Christian worldview. To love and obey the God that has created and saved us should be our primary focus. So you're interested in God's happiness. Is that not equally arbitrary? One aspect of this is that we should treat others with love and respect. Again, a non sequitur. There's nothing that follows loving God that has to do with treating others with love and respect. But if other people are simply chemical accidents, why should we care about their happiness at all? Because these particular chemical accidents can feel happy. And we can too. And we want them to make us feel happy. He's simply phrasing it in such a way that makes us think of something else other than beings with feelings. But naturally, concern about others does not make sense in an evolutionary universe. It does in one that has society. Perhaps the evolutionists will claim that morality is what the majority decides it to be, but this view has the same defects as the others. It merely shifts an unjustified opinion from one person to a group of people. It is arbitrary and leads to absurd conclusions. He said that before, and he didn't defend it last time. He merely asserted it, and again, he's merely asserting it. Arbitrary and leads to absurd conclusions. I think that Christians also build their morality on what the majority decides it to be. I've found many cases where people don't follow the Bible anymore, such as, for instance, nobody follows the Old Testament rules about what to eat anymore. I mean, the Bible goes on for pages and pages about what's okay to eat and what aren't, and Jews to this day still follow those dietary laws. Now, of course, Christians believe that we're living in a new covenant where those laws no longer exist, and they cite verses like, it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but what comes out of him. Whereas I say, wasn't that also true back when the dietary laws were around? It's obviously not based on that. That has nothing to do with what your diet ought to be. Some people also point out to where Peter is told in a dream to eat a whole bunch of unclean animals, and he argues, no, I won't do that. It's against the dietary laws. And not only is that, does that context make it clear that even Peter, after Jesus had left, was still following dietary laws and still believed that it wasn't part of the new covenant. A good citation, if any. But also we get an interpretation of that dream that means that the unclean animals are Gentiles. They're just metaphors. And the Christian is deliberately misinterpreting the metaphor. It's even some of the things that the church believes in are what the majority decided to be. Without the biblical God, right and wrongs are reduced to mere personal preferences. It's not. Again, it's not about personal preference. It's about what society decides is in its best interest. Evolutionary inconsistency. As one example, considers those evolutionists who are very concerned about children being taught creation. This is wrong, they say, because you're lying to children. Now, obviously, this begs the question, since the truth or falsity of creation is the concern at issue. We are convinced that creation is true and evolution is the lie. But the truly absurd thing about such evolutionary arguments is that they're contrary to evolution. That is, in an evolutionary worldview, why shouldn't we lie, particularly if it benefits our survival value? Because our standard for morality is not survival value. I think that is what he believes that other people base their decisions of right and wrong on. It's wrong. It's a straw man. And I would also point out in his example, would he believe that it was wrong if children were being taught the Quran's version of creation, for instance? I mean, he also probably thinks that lying to children is a bad thing. He just doesn't believe that this particular thing is a lie. And if it weren't a lie, we wouldn't think it was wrong. Now, certainly the Christian believes that it's wrong to lie, but then again, the Christian has a reason for this. God has indicated in his word that lying is contrary to his nature and that we are not to engage in it. And he cites Numbers and Exodus. Is this the only reason that anybody would find lying to be wrong? Would it be okay to lie before they had the Bible? For instance, we're told in early Genesis that Cain murdered his brother Abel. Was it okay because they didn't have a Bible along that it's specified that it was wrong to murder? I mean, obviously, if God holds him to that, if God felt that it was wrong for him to do that, he should have believed that Cain had a standard that didn't depend on it being written or citable, as Jason Leisel has done here. But apart from the biblical worldview, why should we tell the truth? Again, it has to do with living in society. He goes on to argue that evolutionists must borrow morality from the biblical worldview. That is the title of this section. I'm going to read you the entirety of this section. One humorous example of this happened at the opening of the Creation Museum. A group that campaigned to defend the Constitution, or DEF CON, opposing the museum had hired a plane to circle above with a trailing banner that read, "DEF CON says thou shalt not lie." Of course, we couldn't agree more. After all, this is one of the 10 Commandments. In fact, the purpose of the Creation Museum is to present the truth about origins. So the evolutionists had to borrow from the biblical worldview in order to argue against it. In an evolutionary universe, DEF CON's moral objection makes no sense, although we certainly appreciate the free advertising. That is the entire content of that. He didn't give any logic or reasoning. He gave an anecdote. Not an anecdote to support his logic or reasoning, to give you an example of how it works. He didn't even reason. Evolutionists don't have to borrow morality from the biblical worldview. We have morals apart from the Bible, obviously. You're probably an atheist, you already know this. Making sense of the evolutionary position. The Christian worldview not only accounts for morality, it also accounts for why evolutionists behave the way they do, even those that have no basis for morality within their own professed worldview nonetheless hold to a moral code. This is because in their heart of hearts they really do know the God of creation, despite their profession to the contrary. I'm so tired of this. Christians can see from their own biased worldview why this is not true. They are not Muslims because they are rebelling against Allah. They don't secretly believe in Allah in their hearts and they're just rebelling against Him. It's the dumbest argument ever. But he has to have some reason for why evolutionists who don't believe in God could believe in right or wrong. He's like, no, secretly you believe in our worldview. You're borrowing from our worldview. Because he can't even imagine how people could get it from any other worldview. He's forgotten what it's like to be a non-Christian, I guess. Conclusions. Nearly everyone believes that people ought to behave in a certain way, a moral code, yet in order for morality to be meaningful, biblical creation must be true since God created human things. He determines what is considered right and wrong, and we are responsible to Him for our actions. People typically see God as outside the standard, like just because He created morality, as they believe, He can do what He wants. I made a video once about how God is genocidal. In the flood account, we're told that one of the reasons for it is because women were having sex with angels and producing babies that were giants in the land, called the Nephilim. And that's one of the reasons that everybody was wiped out. Noah was perfect in his generations. He didn't have any angel blood in his descendants. And that's pure and simple genocide. It's the very definition of genocide, to kill everybody that holds a certain gene. And the reason that it's wrong is because nobody's responsible for the crime they're being punished for. Noah had nothing to do with not having angel blood, and nobody around him had consciously made a decision to be born from a woman and an angel. And so it's pure and simple evil. And do Christians feel that God was wrong to do what Hitler did? Genocide? No, because they believe that He's above all those. They don't hold Him to that standard. So when we talk about standards of morality, Christians don't have one. They don't have an objective standard. They have a double standard. God can do anything, no matter what He does, they'll defend it. And people can obviously have more than one standard too, because not everybody interprets the Bible the same way. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse because I'm sure most of my listeners are atheists, and they already know that you can have morality apart from the Bible. But nonetheless, I did say that I would read through this book, and that is one of the chapters. So I hope you enjoyed this, and you'll tune in for the next one. It should be better. It's on the 3 days and 3 nights account of Jesus and the resurrection. So until next time, peace.